If you're a lawyer and you've been working in a Claude Code or Claude Cowork session for a while, you might have seen it stop to compact the conversation. This is what happens when the chat gets really long and Claude needs to actually clean up the history because it's getting too full. I'm going to explain exactly how compaction works in this video, and I'm going to give you some tips for how to avoid issues that come up when Claude starts compacting the conversation. This is going to help you better understand how large language models like Claude and ChatGPT manage their context. And it's also going to help you improve the overall accuracy of these tools. It should also make them a little bit faster and should let you stretch out your usage limits a bit further. We're going to use an example specifically looking at the Florida Rules of Civil Procedure. This is a document that has 340 pages and it's a PDF, so it's gigantic. I'm over in Claude Code, which I've got open over here. As you can see, I pasted the PDF into the chat, and I'm just asking Claude to read the first 80 pages of this PDF. For the purpose of this demo, it doesn't really matter what Claude is doing. Any chat where you paste large PDFs or use it for a while is going to have similar things happen here. If we take a look at my screen on the bottom right-hand side, one of the things you want to pay attention to is this context window. And as of recording this video in July 2026, the Claude Code desktop app allows you to see this context window. I do not believe this is possible in Claude Cowork or Claude on the web, but the concepts I'm talking about here are still going to apply. If we take a look here, the context window has a limit of about 1 million or 967,000 tokens. And as we can see here, we've used about 11% of it with our messages. And kind of like how your iPhone reserves space for system stuff and doesn't allow you to use the full 64 or 128 gigabytes, Claude also reserves part of the context window for system stuff. So our actual messages, which is what I put here in the PDF, is using about 10%, 11% of the context window, and then another 2% or 3% or so is used by Claude's system messages. As you continue to send more and more messages, this usage is only going to grow. And when I'm talking about tokens here, what I'm talking about is essentially the length of the chat. Every word that's in the chat is going to represent one or more tokens, and every image or every PDF is also going to represent quite a bit of tokens. So as the chat gets longer, the token usage goes up. And if you want to learn more about tokens, I've actually recorded a separate video doing a deep dive on how tokens work in large language models, specifically for attorneys. I'm going to link that in the description. I wanted to get started by just having it read 80 of the pages of the PDF. Let's go and have it read another 100 more. So I'm just going to prompt it and say, read another 100 pages and summarize them for me. I should also note that because this is going to blow through a lot of usage, for the purpose of this demo, I'm actually using Sonnet 5, which is kind of the mid-tier model from Anthropic, and I'm putting it on low thinking mode because I don't really want to wait for it to waste its time thinking here. This is probably going to take a minute or two, and I'm not exactly sure how many pages Claude's going to be able to fit, but eventually it's going to reach a very high amount of context usage. And I think if you just saw that, we jumped up from about 14 to 19%. And for whatever reason, in the Claude UI, this is not always up to date. So as you can see here, the messages says 25%. And then if we actually look at this top, it doesn't line up, which is really annoying. I hope that Anthropic fixes this, but hopefully you can see that the more messages I'm sending, the more context I'm going to use. And you might be wondering, what happens if you get to 100? Well, Anthropic's not going to let you get to 100, and that's where compaction comes in. But if you were to actually get to 100%, the model would completely crash. It would not be able to produce any more text, and it would be completely unusable. Okay, and actually, Anthropic's already compacting the conversation. So what happened here is another 100 pages of the PDF took this context window usage up to a point, and we'll call it maybe 80%. Anthropic, via the Claude app, detected that our context usage was above a threshold, let's call it 80%, and it said, whoa, 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 we're about to hit the limit, we're about to completely crash, we need to take the conversation and summarize it, and basically start a new chat, because if we don't do that, everything's going to completely fall over. Now, they do this as a convenience because this allows you to keep working in a single chat. And we can see here that it's finally responding, and again, I don't really care what it's saying, it's not important for the purposes of this video. But the idea with compaction is, okay, well, if 100% is a hard cutoff where nothing's going to work, maybe the app can detect on behalf of the user when you're getting close, and it can intervene and step in and say, we are going to stop you right here. We're going to try to summarize what's in the conversation and allow you to start a new chat where not everything that you pasted in the context window will be visible, but hopefully enough information about what the chat was about will be there so that you can continue working like it never happened. I'm going to show you what I mean by that in a little bit more detail. And if we take a look at my screen here, I've got a diagram. Let's pretend that on the left-hand side, I'm having a conversation with Claude. So you can see here, it's like, hey, Claude, hello, Tommy, how are you? And then up here, I'm like, wow, that was so smart. Claude, you're so smart. This is amazing. And then I have this line here, which I'll talk about in a second. And then I'm asking it, what's the capital of Texas? And it's telling me the capital of Texas is Dallas, which of course is not true. It's actually Austin. And we go over here, I'm upset, and I say, Claude, that is not correct. And then we've got this orange line and this red line. This orange line here is basically going to represent when Claude is going to compact the conversation. So as you continue to send more and more messages, you can only go to this red line. You literally cannot go past the red line. Claude will not let you. It's not even possible. But Claude, the app, detects when your convo gets to this orange line here. And once that happens, what it's actually going to do is basically copy and paste your entire conversation, send it into Claude and say, hey, Claude, summarize this conversation and then start a new chat. So we can see here after compaction on the right-hand side, you basically get a brand new chat where instead of all these messages being visible to the LLM, now it just gets a summary that says, hey, Tommy and Claude were talking about how to do legal research and also discuss what the capital of Texas was. Now, why do I have this blue line here and why is it below the compaction limit? Well, in practice, at a certain point of context usage, and you can see here it's probably at about like 50 or 60%. And again, this is just a rough estimate. The LLM starts to really plummet in accuracy and hallucinations start to spike. And so that's why I put the hallucination right here after the blue line. If you start to get anywhere near the compaction limit, you are going to start to see reduced performance. Obviously, you're going to be using a lot more tokens. You're going to be spending a lot more money. And in general, you just want to be careful. Okay, but doesn't that get fixed once Claude does the compaction and starts a new chat with the summary? Well, kinda, and it really depends on the type of chat that you're having. The issue is a summary by definition is removing information. There's more information in a chat with all the messages than there is in a summary of the chat. Now, in some instances, a summary might be totally fine. Like maybe you're just having a conversation about, I don't know, where you want to travel and you're researching a bunch of places and it's able to just give you a list of everywhere that you looked at so far. Maybe that's fine. But especially for something like legal research, you could imagine if you load this up with hundreds of cases that you're having it analyze and you want to actually figure out what the different holdings are and what the citations are. If you have Claude summarize that, if there's any errors in the summary or if it missed any key information in this new chat, that's going to be completely missing. So if the actual raw text of an opinion had an important quote in the summary, unless the quote was copied verbatim, it's going to be completely invisible and Claude's not going to have a way to go back and get it. And again, when I say it summarizes the chat, like literally what's happening is they are copying and pasting every message in your chat into a new instance of Claude. And it's like somebody's running a prompt that says, summarize this chat. They copy and paste the output and then dump it into a new chat and then plop you there. So it's a convenient illusion because it means you don't have to think about managing sessions and starting new chats. But honestly, like I keep saying, you don't want to get anywhere near the compaction limit. And frankly, once you're over this blue line, that's when I would start a new chat and ideally far before. Okay, so if LLM performance drops significantly as you approach compaction, and if in general, when you compact the conversation, you lose a lot of information and actually increase the risk of hallucinations, then what should you do to avoid this in the first place? Well, the most important thing is to actually just start new chats a lot more often than you think you need to. A lot of people, especially attorneys, when they use Claude, they'll start a thread to do some legal research. Then in the same chat, they'll be drafting emails. They'll be going over some of their clients' documents. Maybe it'll be for multiple clients in the same chat. As convenient as it is to have one single chat with everything, you're going to get much better accuracy if you start new chats for pretty much every new task. It takes a little getting used to, and it does require that you provide a little more context every time you're prompting when you start a new chat. But once you practice it a little bit, your accuracy is going to be so much better. And like I was mentioning at the beginning of the video, your usage limits are also going to take you much further because you're just not using as many tokens for a single task. I guarantee you, if you haven't thought about this before, you are having your conversations be way too long, and you could definitely just start new chats a lot more frequently. Another way to get around this is just be careful with giant PDFs or lots of images. Those quickly eat up tokens. And as you can see in the Florida PDF example, I just told it to read 100 pages straight out of the gate. That's going to definitely use a lot of context. And you can see it instantly caused a compaction. So if you're working with a big PDF, be mindful of that and tell Claude, hey, there's a table of contents. Look at that first. Only read the pages you need to. Basically force Claude to avoid opening the entire 300-page PDF. That is almost always going to just cause compaction and definitely going to cause you issues. Another thing I see that often causes lots of compaction is making mistakes in the chat. So if you tell Claude to do something and then it goes down this wild goose chase and then later you figure out, hey, that was really dumb. You weren't actually supposed to look at those websites. I wanted you to look at Court Listener or whatever. You don't want to keep that context bloat in the chat. And what I mean by that is if Claude is going to waste 200,000 tokens going and doing something that ends up being completely useless, it's much better to start a new chat, or even better, rewind. So let me show what I mean by here. In Claude Code, at least, there's this button called rewind. And unfortunately, it's not going to let me do it because this conversation was compacted and that history is just gone. But if you click rewind, it basically lets you pretend like you were just at this point in the conversation. So it plops you back here in that exact point. And so what you should do is, if you make a big mistake and Claude wastes a bunch of time and wastes a bunch of tokens, is literally go and rewind to before you did that and then prompt again in the way that's correct. This is going to save you a lot of tokens, and not only is it going to prevent you from compacting, but the other thing is the LLMs literally see everything in the chat window. It's hard for them to ignore anything. And so if you heard the phrase, don't think of a pink elephant, it's kind of like that with Claude. If it goes on a wild goose chase and looks at a bunch of websites that it doesn't need to, even if you tell it that was bad, it's still thinking about that. And you can kind of imagine, it's like when you were in school, you took an exam and the teacher gave you like a physics problem, and they would say something like, you know, the guy was walking at 10 miles an hour and his hat was red and he was driving a green truck. And then if you go and try to solve the question and you select an answer and you realize, wait, I never used the fact that the guy's hat was red. And then you start to think, oh, I probably got it wrong. Like, why would they tell me the guy's hat is red if it wasn't relevant? That's exactly how Claude works. And so when you give it those 200,000 tokens of it going off and doing the wrong thing, it's kind of like that student that's asking itself, why did the professor give me that information if I'm not using it? Surely it must be relevant. And the other thing is, when you start new chats, if you do need to copy context over, it's probably better that you're involved with crafting the summary. The issue with just raw compaction is you're letting Claude decide what's important and what needs to copy over. If you're the one who's driving the chat, you can probably know what needs to get copied over verbatim, what is kind of not as important. And so you can effectively just tell Claude to write a handoff file in Markdown or something like that, which is basically going to be the same as a compaction, but you're in a lot more control and you can have a lot more confidence that it's going to work properly. To summarize, start new chats a lot more than you think. Avoid compaction. In fact, avoid this blue line, which is well before compaction is going to happen. Avoid giant PDFs. And if you do need to use one, make sure you are explicit with Claude about telling it not to read the entire thing and where in the PDF to look, or at least let it search through a little bit before it just reads everything. And if you do need to have a really long chat and you do need to save context for a new one, it's better that you're in control of what that summary is than Claude. I hope you guys found this interesting. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions. I'd be happy to answer them. Or if you have another topic that you want me to cover in a future video. Thank you.